the God that I read about became real. He wasn't just a God that was in a book. I think in God's grand design, like he might give you a piece of something, but he doesn't give you the full picture. I think that there's a reason for that. I think a lot of people, when they first get saved, there is a moment of being so radical, so on fire for Jesus that you don't count the cost.
Welcome to this episode of the Rendered Hope podcast. My name is Philip Carroll, and I am your gracious host. In today's episode, I have a new friend, a person that I've recently met, but someone that I've really connected to. His name is Tre Robinson, and he has a great story. Today, we discuss his testimony, some of the things that he's learned, some of the ways that God has radically changed his life, and some of the advice he has for you, whether you're going through a hard season, whether you're trying to connect with God, reconnect with God, or even navigate the different areas and seasons of your life. And with that being said, please join me in welcoming my guest today, Tre Robinson. Tre, how you doing tonight?
I am blessed. I am blessed. God has blessed me truly beyond measure. I'm honored to be able to be here on your podcast and to share this time with you. Um, how are you?
I'm good, man. It's so good to be with you tonight, talking to you, and I'm excited for what we have to discuss. It's actually a relative first, as we were discussing before we started recording, of just sharing your story. You know, normally we talk about topics, but I'm so excited to just get into who you are and for the people to learn about you and how your story can impact them, whether it's something they've gone through. And I myself, I don't know what it is, so I can't even project what we're going to hear about. But just for those who don't know you, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. For all obvious reasons, my name is Trey. I'm a child of God first and foremost. I'm a man of many different hats, a husband of one beautiful wife, a father of three kids that are appointed to shake the nations, a teacher of the faith with a heavy evangelistic edge for the downtrodden and unequipped, as you'll realize with my testimony, an author of two books, with my third currently being written, a songwriter, uh, a ministry music artist, teetering the edge of retirement with even music. So, man of multiple hats.
Wow, and you decided to get rid of the artistic expression to make time for yourself. We love it. So, when it comes to your story, what is it about Jesus that drew you to him? Let me start there. What is it about Jesus that drew you to him?
Um, you know, I envy a lot of testimonies because so many people have like that one specific moment where they had such a radical encounter, like I was saved on this specific date. And I look back at my testimony and I can't really pinpoint the exact date that it was. It was almost as if he was saving me, right? It wasn't one specific day that I could look back and say, man, it was that day. It was more like a progression through different events. Um, but I think him just becoming more real is really what kindled that fire, to really seek him, to seek after him and to behold him. And I think it was once I beheld him that he became, my Lord, my Savior, my Messiah, my Redeemer, my strong tower. So it wasn't just one specific thing. It was a, a chain of multiple different events.
Yeah, I think so often we become drawn to the stories where it's like, this is my struggle, this was my situation, this was what I came from, and this is how I was radically transformed. But what's equally as important are these stories of process, through a chain of events, through a life, things that I've been told, things that you've been told, things that you've come out of, and really solidifying you, not just through a single encounter, but really something that stuck. So when it comes to your life, when it comes to your story, what would you say are some of the things that the Lord changed about your life from before you decided to commit yourself to him to the way you're living now? Whether it's in your thinking, your attitudes, your behaviors, even your passions. What are some of the things that the Lord has brought you out of?
Um, I would say pride and arrogance was definitely one of the factors. I had to really humble myself. It's I liken it unto those moments where you get food poisoning.
Mm.
It's one of the most humbling experiences where you're at the toilet and you have to throw up, right? There's no fighting it, there's no resisting it, but it happens, right? And it's better when you accept it instead of fighting it. And so it's one of those. It's really really hard to just say it's multiple facets, but it's just one of those events where I had to put pride to the side and I had to receive who he was. I had to recognize who I was, um, and come into that saving knowledge. Um, but yeah, pride. I was a womanizer. I was wrapped up in gang activity. Um, Most of all, I lacked identity. You know, I didn't know who I was, and I was searching for that in so many different areas in my life. But it's when he became my father, when I could recognize that he was my father, that things were able to fall into place and make more sense. They were able to become more clear. But he saved me from so many things, so many things.
It's very interesting, even as you introduce yourself. And part of what you said was someone who loved evangelism and implication of outreach and reaching the lost and teaching and preaching in that manner. And even for you to say you came out of being a womanizer and gang activity, I think when it comes to the typical American mindset, it's safe to say that unless we know someone personally, we're not so hopeful for God to move amongst street culture, gang culture, drug culture. Although we pray for it, we'll pray for it, we'll believe in it, and it reminds me of the Jesus People movement, right? Where all of these churches on the West Coast and started to really see the homeless come into their church, and because they had nice churches, they had nice chairs, they had nice carpets, they started to reject the homeless. We don't want you making our churches dirty. We don't want you doing this. And what happened as a result was God was still moving. So they became the Jesus People movement. We'll just meet outside. We'll still be hippies. We'll do things our own way. And it's almost like when it comes to the Lord moving and delivering people and setting people free, there isn't much we can do to stop him from doing what he wants to do. So with that in mind, when it comes to your story, when it comes to being, rescued, and set apart from your former life, from your former passions, for the things you were wrapped up in, whether you were taught it, whether you just, by circumstance ended up in that place, what does that look like for you? How did that happen where you first began to encounter the Lord, and within you the Spirit began to bring you out of those places?
Um, yeah, it was a little after um my incarceration as a juvenile, um, going into my senior year, and where I divulged into a gang life. Um, while I was incarcerated, I was reading the Bible a lot. I mean, front to back, back to front. I got equipped with knowing the word, just not knowing who the word was about. And so when I got out my senior year, um, I divulged into gang activity, and I was invited to a church event. And in that moment, where the presence of God was tangible, it's really hard to describe. It was tangible. The God that I read about became real. He wasn't just a God that was in a book. He was a living God. And so it was in that moment where all the lies that I had learned, that I had received, that I had lived, they collided with truth. And it was a moment of desperation. Either I choose my lies, and I know what the end of it, the end result is, or I receive His truth and I receive change along with that. So yeah.
That's so amazing to see, because it's like, you really see the example of being drawn into something that you read about, and the way the Spirit acted upon your spirit and your heart. And in the early stages of your life, I imagine, going to that church event and starting those instances and those moments of early transformation. What was the process for you? I think a lot of people, they'll give themselves over to Christ, and they don't really consider the process. This process of sanctification, this process of transformation. And what happens is either they can't account for their own testimony, or they realize that they never really went through their process, and they'll be stuck in their trauma, they'll be stuck in guilt, or even just stuck in immaturity. So for you, when it comes to process, and when it comes to really getting deeper into Christ, and that, what we talked about, that process of being saved, that process of being delivered and set apart and set free, to the point where now, being married, your whole family's in church, your kids are sitting in church, and you're making an effort to really love the Lord with your whole life. What did that look like for you, those early years, and what would you say for those who are stuck in those first few years of really trying to figure out this Christian life?
Yeah, no, the early years were probably the worst, because I was so zealous for God when I was first saved. I didn't count the cost. I kind of, it was a very long honeymoon phase. There's really no other word for it. I was so endowed with who he was, that I just wanted to be radical with my faith. But because of that lack of identity, right, and there was nobody teaching me along the way, what grace was, what sanctification was, what justification was, I would beat myself up in the early years. When I fell, I would condemn myself to the point where I would stay down instead of getting up. And so, along the way, God's character is slowly revealed through many different situations, many different trials, teachings, books, events. You get a culmination of really the body of Christ, right? In the fivefold office, we get edified with all these different things that along the way you start getting a broader image of God's character, God's revealed character. And so within those early years, I would beat myself up so bad, that I think there were a couple of times where I just didn't want to be a Christian anymore. And I think a lot of people, when they first get saved, there is a moment of being so radical, so on fire for Jesus that you don't count the cost, right? You read about all the testimonies and the supernatural things that you don't count the cost, that when the trials do come, you tend to look and ask God, why am I going through this? Now that I'm a Christian, why am I going through these things that I thought I would only experience in the world? So for all those people who are, new to the faith, just now giving their yes, counting the cost is being able to say yes to Jesus through each and every situation. Being a Christian doesn't just automatically make everything easy. As a matter of fact, this is the most difficult decision that you'll ever make in your life. It's literally dying to yourself each and every day. It's a decision of love, right? Love's not really a feeling. For those of you guys who are saved because of that one feeling that you had, right? And it's great that you said yes out of that feeling, but love is not a feeling. It's a decision. And that decision is saying yes to him each and every day. And that requires a no to yourself with most things. Um, count the cost, count the cost and number your days. That is my advice.
I think there's such a mindset when we get saved, especially for those who are radically transformed or come out of cultures such as yours, um, more so in a violent and quick way, where because of the message of the gospel, which is generally preached in a nice way, sometimes it's necessary, but because of the delivery, a lot of people will come into this life, and they'll expect, just because I have peace now, just because I have joy now, I'm not fully expecting my life to be difficult. I'm not expecting to struggle. And it's that mindset that when they do sin, when they do mess up, now they're feeling condemned. And it's almost like what you alluded to, that feeling of wanting to quit, or is this worth it? Am I good enough? And they don't consider, whether because they've not yet been discipled, or they just haven't been doing it long enough, that it takes a lifetime of mistakes, of
Mm,
correction, of conviction, of community, of fellowship, of serving, of giving themselves over to something greater than themselves. Even as you said, the idea that love is not how they feel, but love is a choice. You know, even as Jesus said, to the greatest form of love is to lay down your life for your friend. It doesn't say to want to give your life up. It doesn't say to give your life up and not feel some kind of way about it, but it's the action of doing it. And I think so often when we say we love God and we don't do the actions that show we love God, then it stands to reason, do you really love him? And not to say that you're a liar if you don't feel some kind of way, but I think what happens, even as you said, counting the cost, you end up paying more than you thought you would, and for that reason you think you're in the wrong line of work. You think you're in the wrong lifestyle because you didn't expect to have to do as much as you did. But for you, when you began that process of really understanding who you were in Christ, I think it's really that point of identity where we begin to understand who we are in Christ, where we become more willing to do, to serve, to love, to be, and to get ingrained in community. For you, what would you say was kind of the pushing point where you went from, okay, this is something I don't know about, sometimes I want to quit, and now you're secure in your identity. What are some of the early signs or events that occurred in your life that really began to redirect your mind?
As a Christian, as a Christian, um, when I had first got saved, the church that I had attended had went through a split. Um, and so it was a huge division. You know, I had these loving leaders that surrounded me and would reach out. They would fellowship with me. And in a moment, in a blink of an eye, all of those leaders left, and so I had to witness a division as a newborn Christian, uh, inside of the church that I was saved, and that took a toll on me because people leaving my life it was a constant theme. People leaving or people switching sides. So that's some lingo. People playing both sides. People leaving, saying one moment that they love you, the next moment that they don't. I was familiar with that as as an unbeliever, but coming into the Christian world, my mindset was everything is going to be completely different. I'm not going to expect the type of love that I had on the outside here in the body of Christ. So when that division had transpired and I lost all these leaders that I had looked up to in the faith, these giants, I saw them as giants, people that were on fire for God consistently. Um, I saw them leave the church and they and some fell away and some were doing other things, but I watched that. And so I think in that moment it was almost like a setback for me, but a moment of realization, like my faith in Jesus is not reliant on my relationship with other people or their faith in God. And so that's where I kind of had to branch away and say, this is my walk alone. Like even if 10,000 fall on my right side and 100,000 fall on my left, right? I have to trust in God for myself. Me and my relationship with the Father, it has nothing to do with somebody else. I can't be affected by that. This has to be a personal, yes, a personal relationship with God. And so going through that, it was very very traumatic, just as a new believer, but that was one of the moments where God was building up my faith in him alone and solely just relying on him.
Yeah, that's so good. Even that foundational belief of not being able, some it has to hit us all at some time. We can't look at our leaders and either use them as an excuse or use them as a pillar for our personal faith. And even through a unfortunate situation where you were forced almost to grow into that, but then you see how the Lord will use that, you know, while dealing with them in their processes, also bringing you up in your process from a different perspective. One thing you mentioned to me earlier this week as we talked about this episode was how even through your marriage, your testimony is seen and felt. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but can you get a little deeper into that, just with what you meant by that, and how exactly, even your journey from how you treated women before you came into Christ to where you're now married for many years, and just loving the Lord with your wife. What are some of the things the Lord had to do both in your heart and in your life to not only prepare you, but to give you that level of success in your relationship?
Yeah, it was a learning stage. I had no figure, I had no father figure that was a good image of a Christian man, uh, of one wife, and who feared God. I didn't have that in my life. So going into relationships, my mindset was only one thing. If I could have sexual relations with that woman, then the goal was achieved, right? And so once that goal was achieved, there was nothing further that I needed, right? And so I would either tarnish that relationship, I would toss it to the side, or I didn't care what would happen after that. And so being married as a Christian, you know, um, when I said yes to Gabby, my wife, um, it was a humbling experience because I had to throw feelings off to the side. I had to say no to certain things. I had to deny myself certain pleasures. It Porn was a huge addiction for me, both in the world and then even as a new believer. And so my mindset was already corrupt. It got to the point, and porn has this triggering effect that when you watch it, it becomes very, very easy for you to then imagine any woman that you see doing the same things that you've witnessed in those pornographic videos. And so I would lust with my eyes. Um, and it got to a point where I would do that and appease myself. So instead of saying, well, I'm not cheating on my wife if I'm just looking, right? I had to humble myself and say, no, that is a sin, right? Even just looking at that, imagining it's a sin. I have to make a covenant, just like Job said, I have to make a covenant with my eyes. Um, so I had to put a lot off, a lot of feelings, a lot of desires, and just really die to myself and embrace the marriage life. There's ups and downs, there's disagreements, right? But total denial of self also has to happen uh, in a marriage. I don't find it a coincidence that uh, a marriage, our relationship with Christ is likened unto a marriage. Um, so even the image of marriage in itself, it's a relationship with Christ. It mirrors that denial of self, right? Loving the other person, honoring them, esteeming them higher than yourself. Um, it was a truly humbling experience, but just consistent denial of self. Um, maybe maybe if I could backtrack just a little bit to give some insight without being too broad. Um, Gabby is the reason why I attended church. When I was in a gang after coming out of a juvenile detention center, I met Gabby. Um, Completely divulged in the world, but she was gorgeous. At that time I would have done anything. If she asked for the air in my lungs, I'd give it to her. Um, but I think a big part of that was just lust. There was a physical lust. But she invited me to church, and it was at that church that I encountered the presence of God. And so she dragged me, or she didn't really drag me, but she's the reason why I had that encounter. Her obedience to God, it resulted in my yes to God. So fast forward, when we finally tie the knot, we have one kid. Um, I'm going through all the motions with her, from being broke, struggling. There was one point in time where, with our firstborn, we were going to different churches, different outreaches, and asking for canned goods and diapers. And that's a humbling experience in itself, having to ask other people for the things that you don't have. Uh, I came from a lifestyle of taking it if I didn't have it. So having to humble myself and ask for certain things, it was almost as if I was experiencing humility in its lowest form with her. Um, and so like being able to go through those things in my life with her, I think it really strengthened uh, my love and my desire to really just say yes uh, to marriage. right, and deny myself along the way. But our testimony is so broad, and it's so there's a lot of things encapsulated that it would be a I would be dishonoring the testimony itself if I could just point to one specific thing. But um, really, humility was the biggest thing. Humbling myself and dying to myself was the biggest thing in my marriage, and that really helped us succeed.
So it's safe to say that we here at the Rendered Hope podcast love Gabby, and I'm sure she's watching. So just acknowledging her. You know, something that struck me just from what I know about you, and even things that we're not going to talk about. It's like almost every negative part of your life has turned around and become either a strength or a pursuit of your life. You know,
Mm.
even being a father of three in a faithful relationship, you know, going from either taking or asking to now being self-sufficient and providing for others, even in Gabby's profession of being a realtor, you know, providing housing for other people, something that I'm sure was a struggle for you early on in your marriage, you know, just from the virtue of not having food. You know, it's hard to find housing in around DC when we're not able to even, you know, adequately take care of ourselves for a season. And even seeing how, you know, all you did was seek the Lord. All she did was invite you to church. And through this process of obedience and desiring the Lord, and for her to love you enough to invite you, and for you to love her enough to accept the invitation, it's like seeing the Lord change your life. And it's really the epitome of seek ye first the kingdom, and all of these things will be added unto you. Because I'm sure
Yes.
there had to be a moment where you woke up and it's like, wow, I have all this going on for me now. Like we don't necessarily realize when we're counting the cost that we also forget to count what's being added unto us, right? I think so often, especially in the early stages of our testimony and our walk, we become so hyper focused on the relationships we give up, the tendencies we give up. I'm sure even giving up pornography like created almost like a vacuum in your soul, where it's like that self-denial really nagged at you. And to see how the Lord will almost supernaturally remove those things from your peripheral vision and replace them with things that are greater. You know, what are two or three things that you wish someone would have told you the day you got saved about not just where you were going, but how you were going to get there?
Um, I don't know. That's that's a brilliant question. Honestly, I don't know. The only thing that comes to mind is that suffer and suffer well. Um, to be honest, I don't think there could have been anything, anything that could have been said to prepare me for what I was going to encounter, you know. But I think in God's grand design, like he specializes in that. He might give you a piece of something, but he doesn't give you the full picture. Now, and I think that there's a reason for that, because if I would have known all the mess, all the tears, all the heartbreak, losing friends, losing family, if I would have known that that was encapsulated in my simple yes to him, I probably would have ran away. I would have had a Jonah moment, you know. There, I can look back and tell you that I wish I just had someone who loved God and was able to display that in my life. I wish I had encountered people who are radically evangelizing, in the neighborhoods that I grew up in. I wish I could have seen the supernatural, and encountering the presence of God early on. I wish I could have, because looking back, it feels like I've wasted 18 plus years of my life on nothingness. It's almost as if that just didn't count, because nothing I did was ever edifying. Um, so I wish I had certain aspects, like certain things, certain privileges. I think I have a godly jealousy for those who were raised in church. I sympathize and I understand that they have their own struggles. but there's a godly jealousy because like you have so many images of people who love God, right? Whether some of them are false in their pursuit for God, or whether like some of them become huge names within the body, you have these images, these types, these shadows, these examples of people who you can follow. And all I had was just who can get the most money, who can cause the most hurt, who can do the most wicked and be glorified from that. And so like looking back, I wish I just had someone who loved God. Um, so I think, yeah, just someone who loved God. I wish I had that example. I really do.
Well, one word of encouragement I could offer you is now you get to be that example for those who are coming up in the same situation that you came up in. So they don't need to wait until incarceration to get a Bible,
Amen.
so that they don't have to be the story of not having anyone who understood where they're coming from. And it's unfortunate that you had to go through it to be that example. But then it's like, man, really understanding that the time can be redeemed, that the intentions can be felt, and even what you missed out on, you'll be advanced to the point where it's as if you didn't miss out on it. So that's one
Yes.
word of encouragement that I want to leave with you. As we begin to wrap up this episode, just let the people know, like if they want to follow you, if they want to see what you're doing, maybe see what the books you've written about are about, or even their future books. Where can they connect with you?
Yeah. So my Instagram is it's God Will Strike. That's all one word. On Facebook, it's Los Robinsons. Me and my wife share a Facebook. Um, I will be doing a Bible study on a Zoom platform very soon. You'll get all that information on my Instagram. Both of my books are on Amazon. You can just simply look up my name, Tre Robinson. Um, there's going to be so many things coming up, so many things. But the latest and greatest news will be poured out on my Instagram, and that'll be God Will Strike.
Sounds good. And look, guys, if you get a notification that God Will Strike is following you on Instagram, do not panic. And with that being said, guys, look, I'm gonna leave all of his links in the description. Once again, you do not want to miss out. You're gonna get to meet his wife very soon here on the Rendered Hope podcast. I'm sure I'll have Trey on once again very soon. With that, Trey, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm sure we'll talk more off camera and when I see you. And with that being said, thank you so much. I hope you have a good
Thank
night.
you for having me, Philip. Likewise.
There you have it. I want to thank Trey for joining me today. We had a great conversation. If you want to keep up with what he's doing, see what he has coming out soon, check out some of the books that he's already published, follow him on social media, and things of that nature, please check it out in the description. And as always, if you like the episode, please leave a comment. Please leave a thumbs up. Please follow us on Spotify. Please subscribe to us on YouTube to catch everything that we have coming out. And thank you so much for joining us for the Rendered Hope podcast. We will be back with you next Monday for another great episode.